we're going to talk about how to ignite your civic tech ecosystem. And I think that it's a good place to start with just telling you what happened in Chicago. A lot of people have actually asked me sort of this question, how do we replicate what you guys are doing in Chicago, in our city? And it's actually, I think, a little bit dangerous to say, here is the prescription, here are the steps you need to take to just follow these and you'll be fine. Because every city is different, and there's different strengths and different weaknesses, and there's just different people to work with in all these cities. So I'm going to start with just telling you sort of the broad strokes about what happened in Chicago. And then from there, I think Chris got some questions for us. And then I think we were going to open up to the audience as well. So I will try to breeze through these relatively quickly so we can get into the good stuff. So I'm going to start with a bit of history. This is 2005. This is Adrian Holovati. Does anybody know who that is? He is one of the authors of Django. But actually, before Django, he was working on this website called chicagocrime.org. And back in 2005, the city of Chicago did not have a data portal, but they did have various applications that allowed you to get data by looking on things like maps. So the city of Chicago Police Department had a map that let you see the past, I believe, 2 weeks to 4 weeks of crime incidents that had been reported by the police department. And so he thought that was cool, but he wanted to have the history going back even further than that. So he started scraping these pages and made his own website called chicagocrime.org. This is actually the precursor to Everyblock. This is the first idea that eventually turned into the website known as Everyblock. Does everybody know what Everyblock is? No? Okay, it's basically a community portal, and they pull in a bunch of data from all kinds of places, and it's basically a place for neighbors to have conversations about the things that are going on in their city. So this is the start to that. Another point in time, this is Harper Reid. He worked on the Obama campaign in 2012. He was the CTO for them. And before he did that, he was interested in helping his wife get to work a little bit easier. He knew that there was a bus tracker app that the CTA, Chicago Transit Authority, had released, but he wanted to have his own application. He wanted to be able to do things with that data to make it better. So he kind of reverse engineered the system and launched what was known as the first unofficial API for the CTA. And then eventually, actually, after he did this, the CTA ended up opening up their own API. So the points in time here I'm trying to highlight are, in the beginning, things were sort of pulled sometimes forcibly from the city of Chicago, because people were just so interested in wanting to do stuff with this data. So around this time, a few folks got together, Dan O'Neill, who's the executive director for the Smart Chicago Collaborative, and Joe Jermuska, who works at the Night Lab up at Northwestern, started this group and said, hey, you know what? Guys like Harper, guys like Adrian are working on these things. We should have a group that gets together regularly and just talks about this stuff. And we should use this as a way to sort of have a forum, and then also try to advocate the governments, the county and the city, to release more open data. So they started meeting regularly. Then we got a new mayor. So this guy, Rahm Emanuel, came in 2011. And thanks to all of the work that preceded that I just mentioned, there was a real growing ecosystem, a real growing group of people who were interested in this stuff. And I think it also had a lot to do with the fact that he came from the federal government here in DC. Data.gov was launched. And so I think the time was ripe for the city to change its policy from no open data to let's have a data portal and just put tons of stuff on it. So this is a pretty pivotal moment for us. Because I'm not even involved yet. All these other things happened first, and I'm not even in these slides yet. I'll be there in a few, I think. So these two guys, John Tolva and Brett Goldstein, were the first CTO and CDO, technology and data officers for the city of Chicago. These were new positions that the new administration created to get people to be interested more in this data. And also, Brett's job was to go around and try to find data sets to liberate. So I believe Brett was the first CDO.
I think he was the first CDO in the country.
First CDO in the country. So yeah, it was pretty amazing. So they have a, hey, Socrata data portal, right? And they started putting all kinds of awesome data sets up on this data portal. And actually, this is where I come in. I said it would happen. Man, these slides look so good. So this is an event that actually first got me involved in civic technology and civic hacking. This is an event at the Google offices in Chicago, and it was put together by Google and the city of Chicago. Brett was there, John was there, and basically all the people I mentioned were there in this room saying, and the idea was just, let's look at all the data that's available, let's talk about the tools we can use to work with it, and let's make some stuff. So I went to this event, and I worked with a few people to create a website called Chicago Lobbyists, which is my first Civic app. So what it does is it shows you all of the lobbyist interactions with the city of Chicago. Most cities, I believe, collect this kind of information. In Chicago, it's the Department of Ethics' job to do that, and they collect it from lobbyists, and they have to report how much money they were paid and by who to do what and lobby what city agency. And so one of the first data sets that the city of Chicago released was data on lobbyists. So we said, well, this is kind of new and juicy. Let's just see what we can do with this data. I don't know anything about lobbyists. I know a little bit more now than I did then, but at the time, it was a group of designers and developers, and we were just saying, hey, this data is available. Let's try to do what we do best, make websites that are easy to use, and just make this data accessible. And so this is the result of it. And it's still up to date if you go to chicagolobbyists.org. So after that, I kind of got hooked on making civic applications. A lot of people started having a lot of really interesting ideas around civic apps. This is another one I worked on called Clear Streets. It's an application that tracks snow plows during a snowstorm. So the city of Chicago has like GPS devices on all their trucks, and they broadcast that out. The city released a snowplow tracker app, and we grabbed that data and made this map with it. So every line you see here is a street that's been plowed, and you can actually enter your address and see when your street actually was plowed, if it was at all. So after we made a few of these applications, a group of us, myself, Paul Baker, Nick Rougeau, Ryan Briones, and Chad Pry, decided to start a group called Open City. We said, all right, we keep making these applications, we keep spending all this time doing this, let's actually call ourselves something, because it's just much more useful to talk about and point to like a website and say, hey, look, this is a thing, it's real, it's not just a bunch of people, it's an actual movement, and here is a place where you can go and see all the things we've done. So Open City it was founded mostly out of necessity for just having sort of a place to point to for showing examples. And so Open City, this was about 3 years ago that Open City started. And we found that, again, this is all happening, like Open City is purely volunteer effort. We didn't have any money. We talked about maybe being a nonprofit, but we decided against that. So this was all happening in our own spare time on nights and weekends. And we decided that we really needed a place to get together and work on this stuff. It was hard to schedule since all the people that were involved. And so we decided, let's just meet at the same time in the same place every week. And that was actually the genesis of the OpenGov Hack Night, this is about, I want to say, 3 months ago. It started with 4 of us. And this is a packed room. We get about 70 people every week that care about and want to learn about open data and civic technology. So we started this group, and we made it open to anybody to come, and it's just sort of taken off, and it's become its own thing. So it's getting real. And there's some really awesome organizations that are now part of the ecosystem in Chicago. There's the Smart Chicago Collaborative. Remember that guy, Dan O'Neill, who started the OpenGov Chicago meetup? He's now executive director of this group. They have funding to pay for civic apps. They provide infrastructure for this ecosystem to actually make things happen. People have to get paid, right? And speaking of that, I have my own company now. So I started an LLC 2.5 years ago just because I had actually Dan hired me to do some work. And I decided, hey, I'll just throw an LLC together and start doing this stuff full time. And that's now grown to 5 people. So this is really starting to become a real thing. There's real money here. And also, now that we have this sort of really awesome group on the outside that's doing all these amazing things, that's actually fed back into the way that the city even looks at this stuff. So it's a very virtuous, positive feedback loop that's happening between the civic tech community and government themselves. And so this is the City of Chicago's tech plan that they released, I want to say about a year ago. And in the tech plan is actually referenced the Hack Night as like an important part of the city's success for technology in the future. This is another group that started about 2 years ago now, the Data Science for Social Good Summer Fellowship. Academia is getting involved in this now in Chicago as well. And this is some money they got from Eric and Wendy Schmidt Foundation to bring data science fellows to Chicago. I think they did 30 last year. They did about 50 this year to work on problems with big data and using open source tools. There's the Urban Center for Computation Data, another group that has formed out of academia this time, and also the Argonne National Lab, to do more projects and actually spend money on civic technology. There's LISC Chicago, which has been around for, I want to say 30 years or so in Chicago. LISC is everywhere. They're in New York, and they're in a bunch of other cities, about 30 cities. And they have traditionally been a group that funds local community development organizations with grant funding. So they're kind of this big place that gets a bunch of funding, and then they use it to award grants and provide support to groups in various communities in Chicago. And so they've gotten on board with this stuff too. So, oh man, this is great. So you know you're doing things right when they decide to make an exhibit about the things you do. So this is the City of Big Data architecture exhibit that the Chicago Architecture Foundation put together. That's a map. If you can see in the back there, it's a map that Juan Pablo Velez made of the city. It's the building footprint. So it's kind of the city turned on its side. And the buildings are colored by how old the building is based on open data. And then this is a 3D model they have of the city that actually they light up with various open data sets. So they kind of play these animations over it. So it's become pretty real. So I kind of just wanted to give you the broad strokes about what happened. And then I think that'll set us up for a good conversation on maybe the lessons we can take away from that. So.
Awesome.
I'll have a seat.
You have a seat now? We can relax a little.
Sure.
So thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah.
Derek's one of my favorite guys in open data, and we've known each other for a long time, and it's really awesome to have him as a member of our community. So I was thinking about what question to ask first, and I think I'm going to ask the biggest, baddest elephant in the room, and that's the hackathon. Yeah. What's good about the hackathon? What's bad about the hackathon? How can we improve it?
Right. So I mentioned in a few slides back, a hackathon is actually what got me involved in this in the first place. It was an event that happened at a place where there were a lot of people who were really interested in the same things I was interested in, and it was a place for me to actually, it was an excuse for me to go there and actually, again, make chicagolobbyist.org with a bunch of people. So it has its place. It's really good at kickstarting a community, but I've found that every hackathon that you try to have after that, if it's the same kind of hackathon, has a real diminishing return. So there's a ton of effort that goes into putting a hackathon together. You have to promote it. You have to find really good people to speak. There's a lot, like you pretty much have to line up sponsors and people to provide you the space. It's a ton of work to put it on, and there's really, I kind of like to think of it as like a big bang that gets people excited, but it doesn't really have a lot of follow through. And I mean, I think a lot of, maybe if any of you have been to a hackathon before, a question that people always have afterwards is like, okay, well, this is really exciting. I spent 24 hours and I met some really cool people and we started something, but what do I do now, right? There was really no follow through that was really even thought of. So that's actually why we started the Hack Night, right? Because we wanted to take all the things that were good about hackathons, which is the community, the getting together, getting your hands dirty and actually making stuff, without the bad stuff, the planning it and the having to schedule it and announce it and all that stuff. So I would like to think of the Hack Night as sort of the next step. Once you've done a hackathon, a Hack Night, and these are actually cropping up all over the place. Code for America has a bunch. Yeah. There's one in Seattle. I think my proudest moment with the Hack Night is actually I saw Tom Steinberg, who's kind of like the grandfather of civic tech. He's in the UK. They even started a Hack Night, right? So I mean, it's something that is really an idea that's spread and and it takes people that are really dedicated to showing up every week. To run it, but I mean, you can see there's an interest, right? 70 people a week is insane. So
what's the difference between a hackathon and a Hack Night, and how do you play one off the other? Like, how do you
Right, so I don't ever like to throw hackathons, but people oftentimes ask me for help. And I've actually never thrown a hackathon, even though people ask me about how to do it. So I'd say that a really good idea for how a hackathon can be successful, even in Chicago, is there's all kinds of new data and new communities that can be jump-started with a hackathon that has a narrow focus. So a hackathon in education, a hackathon. Actually, there's Some people who are interested in the tollway, the people from the tollway are interested in having a hackathon. So finding something narrow and having that as your event to kind of get started and sort of showcase the things you want to work on. And then I always offer people like, hey, if you want to just come and mention the hack night and just have people show up to the hack night afterwards, if they have a project they want to continue working on, then that's an option.
So you have the hackathon to kind of inspire people
Yeah.
and to get a new topic into the community, and then you have that roll into the hack night where hopefully they can turn those toy apps into real applications over time.
Right, because you really can't make anything amazing or useful in 24 or 48 hours.
You can create an idea, but
you can
that's
create an idea,
about as far as
right? You
can
can meet some really, and the thing that is really the biggest benefit from a hackathon is the social capital. It's not apps. Like, don't think that you're going to solve all your problems in 48 hours and like have a working app that's actually any good. It's about the people who meet and work on things together and the relationships, the connections that are made at that event. That is the value of a hackathon.
I think that's where people go wrong when they have a hackathon and then they're disappointed with the outcome, is that they had the wrong outcome in mind.
That's right.
Yeah, the goal of the hackathon is not to solve all of your problems, it's to help people come up with ideas to solve those
It's a
problems.
catalyst.
It's a catalyst, yeah. So how do you keep the hack night model on track? How do you make sure that people are, what I've seen happen with some hack nights, unfortunately, is people just show up every week, they work on stuff, but there's no goal in mind. How do you keep people targeted to those goals?
So we're on our, almost third year now at the Chicago Hack Night. And I worried a little bit about that. For a while, we actually came up with a pretty decent solution to what I think one of the biggest problems was people would show up and they want to get plugged into a project, or there are people who would show up and they have an idea and they need some help with some designers or some developers to help them. And I think that was a matchmaking problem that I and the other co-organizers of the Hack Night put on ourselves to try to do, but we were becoming a bottleneck. So the way we solved it is we actually decided to break out everybody into different topic-specific groups run by their own topic facilitator. So we have a group that meets every week on education. We have a group that meets on transportation, the environment. There's a group that's interested in trying to solve pension reform in Illinois. They're meeting every week. So, and the thing is, we've kept it open. If you want to start your own sort of topic-specific group, and we really feel that topics are the way to do it, as opposed to skills, although there are some sort of like working with data groups as well.
You're kind of building a matrix organization, it sounds like
Yeah,
now.
and then the idea is just to have it self-organized, right? I really don't run those things. They're just the people who care about that particular issue run the transportation group or the education group.
It sounds like what you really created is like a network of hack nights that all meet on the same night and share.
Yeah, I mean, we all get together in the same room, and there's typically a presentation that's really short. We try to keep that really short. We make sure everybody says an introduction so they all know who each other is. And then we say, okay, go break out into the groups. Here are the groups, right? Join any of them that seem interesting to you. And if they don't seem interesting to you, start your own.
Yeah.
And then you're
If
welcome
you're interested
to
in
do
this
that.
topic, go talk to this guy in the
Yeah,
corner.
exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's getting time to get to audience questions, but
Sure.
there's one question I wanted to make sure got asked. If the people in the audience wanted to go home after this event and do one thing to engage with their local civic tech community, what's the best thing for them to do?
So I think the biggest takeaway for me in terms of what I think led to all this great stuff in Chicago, there was that moment when all of a sudden open data was there and it wasn't before. That was the thing that got me to the table, right? And it wasn't just any open data, it was high value open data sets. So the city of Chicago has released crime data, they've released, Cook County has recently released parcel data. There's a lot of very valuable data sets that some, even in Chicago still, they're sold, right? These are seen as commodities that the government can use to recoup some revenue on. But those are the ones, because they're sold, those are the ones that are really valuable, right? And those are the ones that if you do open them up, all kinds of amazing things can happen. So I'd say opening up data is great. I assume if you're here, you've already started doing that. And so I'd say that the next idea would be to really try to be present in the community as it already exists. If your town has any kind of technology meetup groups or any people who are already meeting, go there, physically go there. I think that a lot of the benefit that we got out of that hackathon was the fact that John Tolva and Brett Goldstein were there, right? They made their faces known. They became the person that we and people we talked to when we had questions. And like putting a human face on it I can't emphasize how important that is. And that's, again, the place where the Hack Night actually serves as that. We have people from city government showing up, city and county and state government showing up oftentimes every week to be there, to have this connection, to have these conversations. So it takes people, right? And I think a lot of folks are looking for technical solutions to some of these problems. And like, hey, I love technology, but this is a social problem, right? You need to solve social problems with social solutions, right? So you need to actually put the person time into actually doing that.
Awesome. So we're going to open it up to questions from the audience now. One thing to keep in mind, we also have a breakout session just after this where if there's any questions you don't get to, or if you have a pathological childhood fear of microphones, you can come ask them there too. I know I've got like a dozen questions left I want to ask Derek too, so there's plenty of more time for questions. So if we want to start going around the room, if people have things they want to ask, we can get those done. And that you can ask them of Derek or of me. Either one's fine. Oh, okay, we got some up in the back here.
Miami-Dade County, Mike Sarasti from Miami-Dade County. So we've got a great brigade down there that's led by our Rebecca Monson, Ernie Shung from they're a Code for America brigade, basically, and the model's very similar. We're getting anywhere from 20 to 40 people showing up for our hack nights, which is fantastic.
That's awesome.
You mentioned, though, we've been keeping an eye on what Smart Chicago has done, because at some point there needs to be, I think, some funding behind being able to sustain this thing. So you mentioned earlier that you decided not to become a nonprofit, and one of the things that Ernie, Rebecca, and I have been talking in terms of our collaboration is how volunteers are great, but volunteers are, I mean, Rebecca will tell me all the time, she's like, I can maybe build you a prototype, but we just cannot be the people that are going to sustain this project, right? So we've had some discussions about a year down the line from now. We just got named a fellowship city for Code for America, which is great. It's giving us more energy behind the movement, but how do we sustain that after Code for America is long and gone?
Right.
And you guys are doing something interesting where you've professionalized, right, some of these things, plus you still have the Hack Night. So what goes into that decision in terms of how did Smart Chicago get their funding to sustain this, and why did you choose not to be a nonprofit, I guess is the question.
So yeah, Smart Chicago gets funding from some local foundations as well as the City of Chicago. I think they received some federal stimulus money to get started, but they've since pulled in a bunch of other resources as well. So I think they are in a great position because they can shine a light on all the great things that are happening in this community and use that as a way to attract more funding to this area, right? So that's great. To answer the nonprofit versus for-profit question, we actually struggled with that question for quite a while. And then what ended up being the catalyzing reason to make the decision to go for-profit was, well, I think that it's much easier for me as someone who builds technology, who builds websites and the like, to be paid directly for the work I'm done. I think nonprofits have their own unique challenge of writing grants and sort of selling a compelling vision to a funder or a set of funders. And I find that to be something that I'm not very good at doing, right? And so it's much easier to say, hey, I'm going to write a scope of work, XYZ, I'm going to do this, it's going to cost this much money, and there you go, right? And that opens us up to being able to work with not only nonprofits in the city themselves, because they can just pay us, but we actually do get money through from grant sources. We're on a project called Planario, and we got National Science Foundation money to pay for that, right, through the University of Chicago. And then we also do a lot of work with journalists as well. So these are like tools, and I really want to emphasize that this is stuff that's broadly useful. It's not just civic technology. I mean, there's more to it than that. It's working with data. All the problems that you guys have, or some of them, right, are the problems that other people have as well. So it just made a lot of sense for us to just for myself to just start it as a for-profit, because it just is a more straightforward exercise in getting clients.
Any more? I think there's one in the back there or before. No? I mean, I can ask one of the questions that I had on this topic is do open data civic applications, do they have to be open source? Does that matter?
Yeah,
I know a lot of yours are. But
yeah, right.
Do they
So,
have to be?
and I think this is like a philosophy that we sort of just landed on really early and have kind of continued with it, which is Chicago Lobbyists was not only my first civic app, but it was my first open source app. And it just made sense to release the code as open source because we were working with open data, and our goal was not to make money off of selling access to lobbyist information. That was an idea that was floated, which is like, oh, if you can put enough features in, you can charge people $5 or $30 or whatever, right? Pick a price point. But that wasn't the reason we set out to do it. We set out to do it because we wanted to show people what's going on in their city. We wanted to shine a light on this one thing, this one very wonky part of how the city operates. And our goal was to spread that information, to make that transparency more available to people and more understandable. And so we also wanted, when we built it, to have it, people pick up the ideas from it, and eventually maybe the city of Chicago could adopt Chicago lobbyists. They haven't, but they're still free to if they want to. And we've actually seen, because it was open source, I think there was a group in Philly that did a lobbyist site that was inspired by Chicago lobbyists. So I think open source has a real benefit. It's certainly not a requirement, but I see it as far outweighing the negatives. I think that by having something as open source, it makes it easier to spread, which is actually good for individuals and small companies, right? If you are dying to get in the spotlight and have people notice you, if you make your stuff as easy as it possibly can be to be spread around, that's like a huge advantage for you. I mean, you can even think of it as like a marketing approach, right? If it's open source, it's going to get out there that much easier, and your name is attached to it if you have a license on it that says, we like to use the MIT license, which it has no restrictions except for attribution. So if you use our stuff, you copy our code, just reference us, just mention us and link back to us. And that's its own sort of way of getting our name out.
So one follow-up question on that I think is tied to what he was saying too is, what's the best deployment model to make these apps sustainable? I mean, should the government be adopting these apps and running them? Should nonprofits be created to run them? Right. Should businesses run them? Like, how do you see civic apps making it out in the wild?
So I like to think of it in a kind of different framing. I know a lot of people like to group all these apps together into, this is the civic tech ecosystem, and these are civic apps. I actually think we should think about them more as standalone applications. There's going to be good ones and bad ones, right? And it's actually important for the applications to stand on their own and not have to sort of be part of a civic app listing page or something like that to get traffic. You need to actually be serving people's needs and actually solving problems. And Google's a great way to get traffic if you follow open web practices and get your website scanning data, right, or scanning your web pages. And so I think that really thinking about it from the perspective of each application on its own could even be thought of as its own experiment or prototype, and it may succeed and it may fail. We have plenty of applications that we thought when we went into it were going to be awesome, and we thought they were super great, and they just didn't have the traffic. And so we don't spend our time maintaining or upgrading those sites. We are spending our time on the ones that do get eyeballs. And the ones, just for the record, that we're getting a lot of interest in are, the #1 app is Second City Zoning, is an app that lets you look up what a property is zoned as in the city of Chicago. The city has their own zoning map. This one happens to be a little bit easier to use, so people are going to that. Chicago Councilmatic, it's an application that lets you see legislative data and subscribe to legislative data that comes out of Chicago City Council. And then the third one, which is the weirdest, it was the simplest of all the apps we've ever made, is an app called CPS Tiers. And it is a very wonky website for looking up what selective enrollment, what tier you live in, which is a part of the selective enrollment process for getting into some Chicago public schools. And it's this thing, who can imagine, who would even care about this thing? But there happens to be 400,000 kids in Chicago public schools, and their parents very much need to know that information. And so they are an audience that keeps coming back year after year because they need to know this information to know what schools their kids can apply and get into. So each one has its own story, and I really want to I think that is how we should think about these civic apps, not as a group of things, but as their own individual things.
One down here from Cam. Oh. Cam, you only have 2 microphones sitting next to you.
I wanted to see him work. Derek, what are the characteristics of a data set that really engages a civic tech community? And maybe give us some examples. I'd love to hear some examples that are in Chicago, and maybe some examples that Chicago hasn't published yet that you'd like to see.
So features of a data set,
yeah,
as in what's in it,
yep,
or?
Yep.
So yeah, I'd say that yeah, it matters very much having very granular data. I think a great example I like to point to, I'm sure you guys have maybe already pointed to it at the summit, the Chicago crime data set. It's every
a lot.
yeah, every row is a crime report that has the location and the time and the date that it happened, and information about what type of crime it was, and there's some other summary level details in there too. That's a 6 million row data set. It's huge, but it's super granular, and you can do amazing things with it. I think that the closer you can get to that, and of course, there's all kinds of things that you don't necessarily want to publish, right? I mean, there's victim information that they don't put in there. There's all kinds of things that you need to be careful of when you publish granular data, but just know that developers want the most granular data that is possible, because that just, the more granularity you have, the more options you have available to slice and dice it in different ways and to find deeper insights and meanings to it. So that's probably the #1 feature. And then I'd also, just because you asked, I think that documentation is so important, and it's something that's not well done at all. You need to, like, a data set does not speak for itself. You can't just look at the column titles,
Like
the column
data
headers.
dictionary documentation, like about the actual.
You need to
understanding
tell
the
me
data.
like exactly how the data was generated, who generated it, give me the name of the person who I can call and ask questions, and you need to explain what every column means. Because data does not, again, not even stand for itself. It is not self-explanatory. And again, that's like why we have people coming to the Hack Night and asking people like Tom Schenk, who's the Chicago data, he runs the data pool in Chicago. He's there to answer questions and get feedback from people about what the data sets are and what they mean. So, I mean, it takes people to do that.
All right, well, I think it's time that we wrap up. If you have more questions, please come by our breakout session starting now. And make sure you do your Lego bricks. Make sure you come by the happy hour later and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Derek.